Let's return to This Week in America. Here's your host, Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody. Coast to Coast, This Week in America. Clipperton, the acclaimed historical mystery, is the first of 3 novels by Karl Berger, which in different ways deal with a disturbing and tragic world of Germany in the 20th century's history. When Frank Herrmann chances upon documents connecting his German father to Clipperton Island, he can't pass up the chance to learn more about the man who died when he was only 11 years old. Frank's journey, though, is not an easy one. He must deal with the evidence they find showing his father was a high-ranking Nazi involved with Auschwitz and who remained committed to his Nazi ideals throughout his life. Karl Berger is a native of Germany, practicing pediatrician in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh, an active member of the Loyalhanna Writers Association, and has been published in the Loyalhanna Review. His writing is deeply shaped by the trauma and historical burdens of his homeland. We welcome back to This Week in America Dr. Karl Berger, author of Clipperton, a novel. Dr. Berger, welcome back to the program. It is always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
Really looking forward to talking about this. What a remarkable job you've done with Clipperton. This was the first in the series, and I know it took you years before you decided to write this. You're in your 40s and started off on this writing career. What was it about this particular story that stayed with you through your life that really compelled you to sit down and to write it?
Well, I always have been a fan of lonely islands. This was just one of these lonely islands that I identified in the Pacific. And I was there sitting with my son, and we looked for empty places on the globe. That surely was an empty place, the Pacific near Mexico. And then 600 miles off the Pacific coast of Mexico, here was an island that was French. Didn't make any sense. That was starting the gears in my brain. This could be an interesting story, an island that nobody knows anything about. And then I ran into a book that explained it, a rather thick book by Jimmy Skaggs, who has long passed away now. And he wrote about the island and a very disturbing story. And I really then get really tricked into thinking there has to be a adventure story. And then I put in a situation where 2 men and 1 woman wind up on that island. And then there comes a storm, there come drug dealers, they're shooting. And the very background that I choose was that the protagonist is a damaged person. He's damaged because he was born in Germany in the year just after the war, 1946, 47. Yes. America has occupied Germany at that time. And many women from the army were working for the army, secretaries and so on. And she fell in love with a German. And she didn't know much about him. But they got married and they had a son, and that was the protagonist. And it was clear, I put it right at the beginning of the novel, that he was still involved with the Nazis. And there was already a very strong hint that he was somewhat high up in the hierarchy of the Nazis. Of course, this was not definitely known to that little boy. When he was 11 years old, the father made suicide. And the mother basically abandoned him and sent him to her brother, who was in Pennsylvania. Brother was a drunkard, but he had a nice little house. And so he grew up in that house with this brother of his mother. Mother didn't care about him anymore. There he meets his antagonist, Jim, who is totally different. He is totally not self-conscious as Frank is. He is outgoing, he's a good wrestler, and he's very aggressive. And these 2 men now, they get to know 2 women. But one of the women that my protagonist, Frank, marries, he takes a flight with her, and he ditches the plane into the Long Island Sound. She dies, and now we have a situation of 2 men and 1 woman. Both are in love with her. Of course, Frank, hesitant, a kind of a broken person, somewhat hollowed out. We don't know exactly why. And Jim, very, very self-involved and but he gets then into trouble with drug dealings, and then they find some hints in documents in Germany that hint at Clipperton, that there was some documents in Clipperton, something about his father in Clipperton. It doesn't make any sense why, but it comes out at the very end of the novel, where he finds all the documents that tell him that his father was a high Nazi, also involved with Auschwitz. I hope that gives you an idea.
Well, yes, without giving too much away, and this is a compelling read. Once you start, you're not going to want to put the book down. You're going to want to read another chapter and then another chapter to see how this all plays out. Our guest on the program is Karl Berger, Dr. Karl Berger, Karl with a K, Berger. The book available wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, the publisher, booksidepress.com. Links on our website, thisweekinamerica.us, that will take you directly to websites, get information, and be able to order the book there as well. What types of challenges did you have? You're writing this book. This book is adventure, survival, betrayal, and you're balancing that with this shame that so many young Germans were trying to deal with in the aftermath of what happened in Germany in the 20th century. How did you balance all of that to make an entertaining book from a standpoint of having the suspense and wanting the reader to stay in the book, adventure with this theme of what happened in a country, a young population of the country dealing with it?
You put your finger right on it. How can you write an adventure story with shooting and lovemaking on the beach and all these things? Then, as the background of that story is the guilt of the Germans and the guilt of the father of the protagonist. And I did this in a way that I brought in at the very beginning of the novel already somewhat disturbing, something that throws the reader off. There is some secret here, okay? But we don't know exactly what it is. And I also showed the protagonist being hollowed out, being damaged by something that is not quite clear. Well, obviously the suicide of the father, and then the mother abandons him. He is damaged also by the history, but this will not be 100% clear until the end. But it is a thread that goes through the whole novel. Why is he acting like that? Why is he not self-confident? What is going on with that? He is a damaged protagonist, a damaged hero. And I think by that I could balance these two things that are jar each other somewhat. Adventure story and a story about the very background of German guilt and shame.
What was this like for you as a writer to make this compelling novel that will keep us interested, and you get to bring in all these elements, the love triangle, all of the surprises along the way as we're reading the book, while at the same time you're still, we talked about this last time, dealing with the emotions of what you went through as a young German, where Germany is today, which I want to touch on before we end the conversation today. How challenging was it for you to balance all of this, to tell this great story that you tell, yet there's a personal part of you in writing this story?
Well, there was almost a little guilt involved here, because I said, I'm writing here a very intentional story. I want to get at the reader. I want to interest the reader by any means, make a good story out of it. But on the other hand, I want to convey a very solemn message. Well, the message that I basically have is that I'm from a generation now that's getting pretty old now, of course, that had fathers that we didn't understand, or that we never challenged, and that we never queried. We never really asked them where they were in their mind when the Nazis were at power. And I'm a typical German at this point. Our fathers didn't talk. It was very unusual. And we didn't make them talk. But when I talk around with my friends, they do not make their fathers talk. And I think that's a very, very important thing to do. For the Germans, it's very essential. We wound up with a kind of a collective guilt that we didn't talk to them. Guilt is maybe not the right word, because guilt means you did something wrong. Yes. But the shame is that you were part of a group of people, a nation, that did something terrible.
There's a famous German writer, W.G. Siebold. Let's talk about him for a second, because his writing, and he wrote in German as well as in English, was dealing with this and guilt. And again, guilt's probably not the right word. I don't have a better one right now, so we'll use that with an asterisk by it. But talk about that this really, it's not just you and a few others that feel this way. It was basically, I don't want to necessarily say a whole generation, but a large part of a generation growing up trying to deal with this conflict.
Well, Siebold was born about 3 years later, 1944. I'm born in 41. And what he did is he has a very parallel life. He went to England. He lived in England. He wrote in English. He's German. And he was prevented from really being involved in the war. His parents lived in a very rural area that was never bombed. And they had really never a shortage of food or anything like that. So when he came to Munich and saw all the ruins and how Munich looked like right after the war, totally bombed out, he was very surprised. He had also a big problem with shame and guilt. He lived in England, I think about 12 or 14 years ago. He died tragically in an accident. What he did is he wrote generally about history in a very, very melancholy mood. It is such a typical, unusual writing that among writers that know about these things, there is now the word Sebaldian. When you talk to a writer and you said it's a Sebaldian mood in the novel, it's a kind of a melancholy, demure, kind of foggy mood.
Yes.
So he almost invented that.
Dr. Karl Berger is our guest on the program. If you're Googling, Karl is Karl and Berger, Berger. Book available wherever books are sold. The name of this book is Clipperton. The other book we talked about on the program, available as well, The Wound Closest to the Sun. Interesting historical perspective, looking back at 3 pivotal time frames. And that interview, by the way, is in the archive. If you go to our website, you'll find that, or just Google it, and you'll be able to find one of the many podcast channels it's on, and the YouTube version of that as well. Talk about in writing this, getting the book out there, having people read the story, and you can't read the story without putting yourself in that position. What if it were my father? I had these questions. Now I'm getting these questions answered, and they're not the answers that I was hoping for. What do you hope the takeaway is from the reader once they read Clipperton?
Well, it's a solid adventure story with a good end, and the hero will be healed, so to say. And there is the end. He finds the truth. So the real, definitely, you're gonna have to live with the truth. And right now, there are tendencies to change the truth.
Yes.
Very, very recently, there are big efforts to rewrite history. And in Germany, there is the AfD, Alternative for Germany, and they are just denying that we should really get back to that feeling of guilt and shame, that this is not the basis on which you can create a nation. That's their argument. And they are in the ascendancy in Germany. But the essential of the German Republic is really that they are built on that acceptance of shame. And it wouldn't work otherwise. I think it would be a tragic mistake in history to throw that out.
I was reading a headline in the opinion section of the New York Times that talked about the country that was a model of never again. What happened, Germany's big far-right comeback. First of all, do you see it that way? And what happened? We're all told history repeats itself. We need to watch. We need to be vigilant. Yet we seem, no matter what country you're in, it appears, that we really need to watch because history does repeat itself. What do you think is happening over there? And is this a country that was caught off guard, that said never again, and suddenly it's happening?
Well, right now the Germans are somewhat apart from the other nations because they were the main perpetrators. They are really well responsible. The German nation at that time was responsible for the biggest crime in recorded history, in my opinion. And the other countries, they have more leeway. But when it comes to the American point of view, or they have to account for that. And it shows a total disregard of history if they just bump in there and say, you can just do this, you can be more right-wing now, and you can make 20% of the German population voted for them. So I'm very alert about this situation and very concerned about the situation.
Dr. Karl Berger, our guest on the program, talking about his novel, Clipperton. That's the first in a three-part series. Let's talk about the series. Briefly mentioned the wound closest to the sun. I love the concept of that, and we talked about it. The interview is in our archives. And then talk about the third book in the series.
Well, the third book is more autobiography. It deals with happenings in the German army after the war, where the Nazis were hiding. And in my life, I had two uncles. One uncle was a communist during the Nazi regime. How he survived, I'm not quite sure. And the other uncle was a SS man. SS means special services. These were the very avid Nazis. And this tension went through the family, was never really couldn't be possibly straightened out, but it was covered. It was hidden from me. And in that novel, I bring it out. So, but that's more autobiography. That cuts, one could say it took me two novels to come to an autobiography type.
Interesting.
There's a certain courage involved.
I would love to have an opportunity to talk about that. And let's talk about writing the first two and then sort of summarizing it, as you say, the autobiography as the third one. What has this process been like for you? I know you've said that this is deeply personal, this story, what you've dealt with, continue to deal with. What has this done? We know what it will do for the reader. They will be captured by your story, taken away, put themselves in this position. They'll do some thinking as well as being entertained by the story. What's it done for you? What impact did these books have on you as a person?
Yeah, I mentioned before the word courage, because I could even put it this way. It took me two novels. It took me to get some distance to writing, or some expertise in writing, some knowledge about writing, to be able to make this to write the third one. And the third one is more difficult to write. And I had also tremendous help from a very, very good woman that helped me, with the wording and the writing. So, but almost now at a certain standstill, as if the third novel, which is autobiography more or less, has now kind of three novels. It's almost a trilogy.
Oh, yes, exactly. And you'll find all the information wherever books are sold. Basically, you go to Amazon, go to booksidepress.com, the publisher of this book that we're talking about today, Clipperton, Barnes & Noble, any of those places. The link's on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. You go there and you'll be able to get information on the books there as well. I'm fascinated reading back when you started this back in 1981, research by encyclopedia. Now, of course, you've got Google. You could sit where you are with a laptop computer and do research for the next book. Talk about that. It was work when you had to go back and start research, for example, on Clipperton years ago. Talk about that, because it's really advanced, easier now for a writer to do research, I would assume.
There was a tremendous coincidence involved. I began to think about writing this novel, and I had that word Clipperton, and at that time, no internet, nothing. And I walked by a bookstore. It's actually the bookstore in Manhattan. I don't really remember exactly which one. And there was a book named Clipperton by Jimmy Skaggs. And I said, this was like a electrical shock to me. Here I am. I want to write a book about that nobody knows anything about. And here is a whole book about it. And Jimmy Skaggs. And of course, I immediately bought this book and read it furiously, right? And then it was done. I said, this island is the weirdest thing in the world. It's French. There's nobody there. There's a big history of suppression of women. It's a feminine story in a certain way. Oh my God! So I have to write that story.
And the rest is history. That book is available, Clipperton, available now wherever books are sold. Also, the second in the series, The Wound Closest to the Sun. Again, our interview you can find online in our archives. What are you working on now? You're a great storyteller. You develop the characters. You've got all of these themes. You've got layers to the story. Are you working on another novel?
No. And there is something about you could call a post-achievement depression. you finish something and then it comes an emptiness. I'm working on that right now. I'm working on a short story right now, but right now my radar is going for the next story. But my radar hasn't picked up a target yet. So I live with that right now. But really, it presents in many writers almost like a depression, because they, not what's going on with my life. There's now total emptiness. I might write a book about emptiness.
Well, that's interesting. You think that the book is published, you're holding a copy in your hand, you're getting reviews, you're getting compliments, and then reality sets in like, okay, is this all there is? It's over with now. Now what am I going to do? It sounds like maybe to get the next idea, a trip back to Manhattan, walking by bookstores and seeing if there's any book cover in there that jumps out that captures your attention.
I would say, if you want to be creative, walk through bookstores. That's right. Just look around.
A couple minutes left of the program. You've written short stories before, and you talked about doing some of that now. Talk about the difference between a short story where you get right to the point, it's over, finished, and everybody moves on with their lives, and developing a story, as you have done so well in Clipperton and The Wound Closest to the Sun. Do you have a preference? Do you like one form more than the other?
No, not really. The short stories that I wrote were, of course, in a short story, you always take one event that you build on. And they were really about Johnstown. The people around Johnstown, the iron industry, the people that live here in very, sometimes poor situations, it's completely different. It was, these short stories were grown around here. And I published them in little, a newspaper and so on. And then came, of course, the idea with Clipperton. But there are two souls in and one is sitting basically bent or rooted in the area around here, iron industry, a town down in its luck. And the other one is really looking for empty places in the Pacific. So it's quite a difference.
Very interesting. It'll be fascinating to follow what you do, and hopefully we have a chance to talk more. It's always a pleasure having you on the program. I know you said in the beginning when you wrote Clipperton, you really wanted this to be translated into Germany. I'm looking online, and it looked like German in talking about the book. Is the book available in Germany?
Yes. No, not yet. But a friend of mine, actually, the husband of my cousin in Germany, he translated the book many years ago. And then it didn't go anywhere. And then I got the book again, and I didn't really have to rewrite almost nothing in that. And so it is being printed right now, actually, in the German version. And I hope, of course, that it makes a big impact in Germany. Yes, I hope that very well, because it is an important book.
It is, and as we close today, we touched on history, and I don't want to do that too lightly. We see signs in the U.S. that alarm people. We see signs in Germany that alarm people, including yourself. How seriously should we take history? Some people will say, but the times were different then. We would never go back and go through that again. Yet you see signs that maybe that road's being built to go back through something similar to that. How do we put this in perspective?
Well, isn't that the famous word of Soroyan, who said, if you don't learn from history, you're bent to repeat it?
Yes.
And I think that's the best way anybody ever said it. And obviously some people now refuse to learn from it. That's what I'm seeing.
Well said. And boy, the time always goes by so quickly with our guest, Dr. Karl Berger. That's Karl, K-A-R-L, Berger, B-E-R-G-E-R. If you're Googling, you can go right to thisweekinamerica.us, find all the links for the books. Booksidepress.com, the publisher, of course, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble. The book's available wherever books are sold. And again, links on our website. I'd like to thank Brookside Press for arranging our conversation today. Brookside Press is a Canadian-based self-publisher dedicated to assisting authors worldwide with their publishing and marketing needs. Booksidepress.com. Dr. Berger, it is always a pleasure. Thank you for being with us. Hopefully we can do this again. Thank you for being with us on the program. The name of this book is Clipperton, a novel. The book we talked about before, The Wound Closest to the Sun. Doctor, thank you for being with us on the program. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure having you on the program. Once again, this book, Clipperton, a novel by Karl Berger. Information on our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And we're back on today's program right after these messages.
This Week in America is online. You can visit our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Scott Pinkerton, associate producer of This Week in America. Jay Anderson, segment producer. Ben Watson, webmaster. Otto Bechet, director of engineering and TV production. This Week in America produced and is a trademark of Blue Funk Broadcasting, LLC. For information on all of our guests and to listen to this week's show, our website again at thisweekinamerica.us. And I'm Sean Bratton, executive producer of This Week in America.